Cheatham County, Tennessee. A quiet community tucked between winding back roads and river fog. The kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. But in the fall of 1999, inside a small home on 1029 Jane Circle, something did happen. Something no one could agree on. Something that would tear apart a family, divide medical experts, and trigger a legal battle that stretched on for more than a decade. This is the story of a 2-year-old boy whose death shocked an entire county, a young mother caught in the middle, and a man whose conviction would climb all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court before a final truth emerged. This is the case of Dennis Pylant and the tragedy that began inside a house where too many secrets were waiting to be uncovered. Before tragedy struck, life inside a small Cheatham County home looked ordinary from the outside. 1029 Jane Circle, a quiet street, a little trailer. The kind of place where neighbors wave from driveways and kids play in the yard. But behind that front door, 4 lives were tangled together in ways that would later unravel in a courtroom. Inside lived Amanda Davis, a young mother trying to rebuild her life after a difficult marriage. Her oldest child, Stephen Joe Davis III, had just turned 2. A wide-eyed little boy born in 1996, not yet tall enough to reach the doorknob. Not yet old enough to understand the danger closing in around him. Amanda had moved her children here after separating from Stephen's biological father. She planned to start over. New home, new routine, new man. That man was Dennis Pylant, 28 years old, born October 4th, 1970. He wasn't just Amanda's boyfriend. He lived in the home, helped with the children, and stepped into the role of caretaker. Whether he was ready for that responsibility, well, that's one of the questions this case raises. And there was one more person inside that house, a quiet observer, Rebecca Pylant, Dennis's young daughter, around 10 years old, lived with them on Jane Circle. Unlike the toddlers, Rebecca saw things, heard things, remembered things, and years later, she would become one of the key witnesses, her testimony echoing through the appeals courts long after the trial ended. 4 people, 1 house, and a chain of events about to unfold that would shake this small Cheatham County home and send shockwaves through Tennessee's legal system for decades. September 23, 1999, began like any other day. Morning routines, kids in pajamas, nothing unusual, nothing that hinted at the tragedy waiting just around the corner. That afternoon, Amanda Davis left the house to run errands. She didn't take the children with her. Inside the home stayed 2-year-old Stephen, his baby brother, 10-year-old Rebecca, and 28-year-old Dennis Pylant, the only adult in the home when Amanda walked out the door. And that detail, who was home and when, would become one of the most important pieces of this case. Sometime later that day, emergency responders were called to the house. 2-year-old Stephen was unresponsive, with injuries that immediately raised red flags: abdominal trauma, internal bleeding, and fresh contusions. When paramedics arrived, Pylant was there, emotional, panicked, giving explanations that did not match the child's condition. He said Stephen had fallen. He said it was an accident. But the moment Stephen reached medical professionals, everything changed. Doctors quickly determined the injuries were not consistent with a fall from a bed or any low-height surface. These weren't the kinds of wounds a toddler gets from slipping off furniture. These were the kinds of injuries that trigger immediate suspicion. And by the next day, little Stephen was gone. Amanda's world shattered. Cheatham County was shaken, and investigators turned their eyes toward the one adult who had been alone with the child when it happened. Dennis Pylant. When Sergeant Floyd Duncan first arrived, Amanda mentioned that Stephen had low blood sugar and sometimes refused to eat. At first, investigators considered a medical collapse, but that theory didn't last long, because then came the autopsy. The moment everything changed. Dr. Charles Harlan, the state's chief medical examiner, found 2 lacerations in the gastric mesentery, massive internal bleeding in the abdomen, and red contusions across the mid-back. His conclusion: Stephen bled to death internally from 1 or more heavy blows to his body, the kind of force consistent with a hand, a fist, or an object, not a stumble, not a short fall, not low blood sugar. This was trauma. The only person old enough to truly see and remember events was Rebecca. In court, Rebecca testified that she came home from school and saw Amanda hitting Stephen with a wooden spoon. Later, after Amanda left to run errands, Stephen kept crying. Dennis grew angry. Rebecca heard sounds from the bedroom that sounded like Daddy spanking him. When she looked in, she saw Dennis holding Stephen up and spanking him twice. After Amanda returned home, Rebecca heard no more sounds from Stephen's room. Her testimony gave investigators and the jury a chilling timeline. Amanda hits him. Dennis hits him. The child goes quiet. By the next morning, he's dead. During the initial investigation, Amanda leaned heavily on medical explanations. But years later, during post-conviction hearings, multiple witnesses claimed Amanda had privately said something very different. Dennis's grandmother testified she heard Amanda say she beat him and didn't mean to kill him. A co-worker claimed Amanda said she couldn't live with herself knowing she had killed him. Dennis's sister said Amanda admitted she made a deal to get her other child back and would lie and do whatever it took. These were not Amanda's sworn statements. These were other people repeating what they say Amanda told them. Judges fought for years over how much weight those claims should carry, and whether jurors should have heard them. By the time the investigation ended, the state believed Stephen's death was not an accident. They believed it was aggravated child abuse, leading to murder, and they held Dennis Pylant responsible. At trial, prosecutors highlighted that Pylant gave one explanation to 911, another to paramedics, another at the hospital, and a different version to deputies. They argued this was not confusion. This was a man distancing himself from the truth. When 10-year-old Rebecca testified, the courtroom held its breath. Her words were emotional, detailed, consistent. Combined with the medical evidence, the prosecution painted her as a heartbreaking but credible eyewitness. The state argued, this child didn't collapse, he didn't fall, he wasn't starving, he was beaten. And Dennis Pylant was the only adult present to do it. The jury believed the state. Dennis Pylant was convicted of first-degree felony murder and aggravated child abuse. He was sentenced to life in prison. The defense vowed to appeal. At first, appeal denied, petition denied, case closed. But then, the Tennessee Supreme Court stepped in. They ruled the lower court made serious errors. Witnesses who could have changed the outcome were wrongly excluded. They ordered the case reopened. And in June of 2011, Dennis Pylant's conviction was overturned, vacated, erased. For the first time since 1999, the case was wide open. People expected a retrial, but that is not what happened. Instead, prosecutors offered a plea, not to murder, not to aggravated child abuse, but to reckless homicide. In April of 2012, Dennis Pylant stood before the court and entered a plea of no contest. 4 years TDOC, 13 years of jail credit, immediate release. After a decade of legal warfare, the case ended quietly. Amanda Davis was never charged. Her alleged statements were never proven in court. Rebecca's testimony remained central, and the medical findings still cast a long shadow over what happened. The justice system didn't declare Pylant innocent. It didn't declare Amanda guilty. It simply reset the board and walked away. A child died. A man's life sentence vanished. A mother carried unanswered questions. And the truth, the real truth, never fully surfaced. Not in 1999, not in 2001, not in 2011, not in 2012. In Cheatham County, this case remains what it has always been: a tragedy, a mystery, and a reminder that sometimes justice doesn't bring clarity. It brings consequence. Real people lived this. Real people suffered. And real people are still carrying the pieces. Stephen deserved better. The justice system made its ruling. After his release from prison in 2012, Dennis Pylant was arrested again in June 2014 following a violent series of events in Perry County. According to court records and local reporting, Pylant was involved in a home invasion that left an elderly woman shaken but not physically harmed. He attempted to steal a vehicle, vandalized property, and fled from law enforcement, at one point striking a patrol car during the pursuit. As a result of that incident, Pylant faced numerous charges including aggravated burglary, aggravated assault, attempted carjacking, reckless endangerment, vandalism, theft of property, and assault. Court records show that many of these charges ultimately resulted in guilty pleas, while others were dismissed. The incident marked a significant return to criminal behavior following his release. Dennis Pylant moved to Louisville, Kentucky, where he lived quietly for the remainder of his life. On June 22, 2024, Dennis passed away in Louisville. His family chose cremation, and no public services were held. And the echoes of this tragedy still linger in Cheatham County. One more story carved into the shadowed history of our Middle Tennessee back roads. And the echoes of this tragedy still linger in Cheatham County. One more story carved into the shadowed history of our Middle Tennessee back roads.